everybody. I hope you're all doing well. So we are moving into our final week of class discussion. This is going to be our last Discord class conversation, and as we move into this discussion, we're thinking towards the future. And, we're thinking about what mediated futures will look like. And this is also an effort to help you get brainstorming for your final project, as you'll be crafting some kind of, vision of what you hope the future to be like, which is very open-ended, broadly defined. It can engage some form of visual production, or it could, take the shape of a paper. But in some way, you're thinking toward, what social change will look like, the concept of social change in a mediated era in an expansive way. So this week, I thought it would be helpful to, consider mediated futures in relation to contemporary social movements. So I thought it would be helpful to potentially, just engage in a little bit of, discussion about cultural history of social movements in America, and thinking through, how we got to the moment that we're in. So this is going to be a very broad, sweeping, overview of social movements, without delving too deeply into them, but just to get us thinking about, what the future will look like considering this historical trajectory. So, as many of you I'm sure are familiar with, in the 60s and 70s, there was a huge uptick in terms of various forms of social uprising and protests and whatnot. And, during this era, we had the Black Liberation Movement, we saw the Women's Liberation Movement, we saw the LGBTQ plus justice really take shape as well. So all of these movements that were addressing a variety of issues and concerns that shared a lot of common threads when it came to how rampant inequity was taking shape, and how, contemporary capitalism was really, taking form in terms of, reinforcing various forms of inequity, and, a lack of access to various resources, and perpetuating various legacies associated with, social hierarchy. So thinking about, the ways that we can see these various liberation movements as being intertwined when it comes to the ways that, identity and experience can be organized within a larger framework of social hierarchy. So pushing back against those forms of hierarchical thinking really grounded a lot of the growth of these movements. So we saw from the 60s and 70s era a movement into, the 80s, 90s, time frame, where many of those social movements that, were engaged in, huge, forms of social protest and whatnot, they became institutionalized, and they became splintered off because they became institutionalized in the form of, various nonprofits and various, organizations that then became this institutionalized wing of social justice. And there's a lot to be said, and we won't get in the weeds of talking about, the benefits of a decentralized movement that is centered around protest and organizing, that does not have roots in any sort of institutional structure, such as nonprofit organization and whatnot. But we can think about the ways that we saw that movement into, contemporary nonprofits, and how social justice came to take shape in a big way through those various formats. And as a result, we saw the dissemination of, various forms of protest just kind of fizzle out. But now, we are living in an era where we see a huge resurgence of, protest and social uprising, because so many of those issues that were coming to the forefront during the 60s and 70s have been swept under the rug in a huge way. So thinking about various forms of, gender inequity, racial injustice, and whatnot, those issues didn't go away. They just took different shapes in terms of politeness and, not discussing them in, a very upfront capacity. So now we see ourselves in this moment where a lot of those issues, like, with the Black Lives Matter movement, with various forms of feminist organizing taking shape to demonstrate the ways that a lot of these issues continue to, be something that we need to grapple with. And, we can discuss those issues on, social media. We can, get boots on the ground, doing grassroots organizing where people are actually in the streets engaging in different forms of protest. And what's complicated now is the ways that digital spaces and, on the ground organizing and protest are in conversation with one another, because as we've talked about a lot in this class, very often digital spaces can, both contradict as well as enhance those various social movement goals. So this week we are dreaming big and thinking about, we're living in this moment of crisis and possibility in many ways. So we see that, during moments of cultural crisis, during moments where, there is so much unrest, there's so much inequity that's, plaguing our society, that it can function as, a key moment of possibility and opportunity to build the world that we want to live in. So that can take shape through various forms of protest, that can take shape through various forms of art and activism. It's really, important to consider the ways that we can be creative in thinking about, how social change takes shape. And it's not just through, on the ground protest, but that is very key in, making culture shifts. So as we dream big this week and thinking about what is the world that we want to look like, take shape as, we're considering these questions as you think through how you might approach your final project. So I look forward to talking with you all about this week.